I guess you just take the little moments that you
Our
get.
story isn't over yet, and I'm gonna make it my mission that is remembered for the beautiful and bright and strong and kind person.
The winter air in Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, in December of 20 was crisp and unforgiving, the kind of cold that settles deep into your bones. The streets were quiet, the trees bare, and the town seemed wrapped in a blanket of stillness. But underneath that surface calm, something terrible was about to unfold, something that would change the lives of one family forever and expose a predator who had been hiding in plain sight. Erica Jean Schultz was 26 years old. To those who knew her best, she was bright, thoughtful, and gentle. She had a deep love for animals, often volunteering her time at local shelters. Her friends and family describe her as someone who could light up a room with a quiet smile rather than a loud entrance. She was a person who noticed small details, who remembered birthdays, and who cared enough to check in on people when she sensed they were having a hard day. Erica was on the autism spectrum, something her family embraced and understood. While she lived independently, she thrived on the safety of routine, knowing what each day would bring, who she would talk to, and when. Her sister, Emily Corbin, was one of her closest companions. The two shared not only a familial bond, but also the easy rhythm of friendship. Emily was used to hearing from Erica frequently. Text messages about small daily updates, reminders about upcoming plans, or simply a quick good morning. So, when Emily realized she hadn't heard from Erica, even for a few hours longer than usual, she felt the first prick of worry. December 6th, 20 was a Sunday. Erica was supposed to work that day, but she didn't show up. She didn't call in sick. She didn't answer her phone. At first, Emily tried to push the anxiety aside. Maybe Erica had overslept. Maybe her phone had died. But with each unanswered call and each text that went without a reply, that gnawing sense of dread grew heavier. By evening, Emily couldn't ignore it anymore. She drove to Erica's apartment. The lights were on inside, but there was no answer at the door. Everything looked normal at first glance, nothing to indicate a break-in, no signs of a struggle. But Erica wasn't there, and her absence felt wrong in a way Emily couldn't put into words. The next step was to contact police. Missing adult cases often start slow, with questions about whether the person left voluntarily, whether there might be a misunderstanding. But Emily made it clear, her sister didn't just disappear. This was entirely out of character. Erica didn't have a pattern of vanishing without explanation. She wasn't the type to go off on an impulsive trip. Something had happened. Investigators began with the usual steps, checking Erica's phone records, reviewing her recent activity online, and speaking to neighbors. That's when they discovered the first lead. Erica had been communicating with someone named Dave through a dating app. The messages seemed casual at first, but they painted a picture of a man who had been steadily gaining her trust. The man's real name, as police would quickly learn, was Harold David Hallman III. Hallman was 43 years old, and he was not the friendly, normal date he had pretended to be online. He had a long and troubling history, one that included prior violent offenses and a past that stretched far beyond Pennsylvania. He was transient, moving between locations and often living out of motels or with acquaintances. On the surface, he seemed to float through life without much stability, but beneath that, police suspected, was a deeply dangerous individual. Using cell phone data, detectives traced the digital breadcrumbs. Hallman's phone had traveled with Erica's into rural Luzerne County, specifically Butler Township. After that, Erica's phone went silent. Hallman's, however, returned alone. That single fact told investigators volumes. While police pieced together the timeline, Emily and the rest of Erica's family lived through a nightmare of waiting. Every ring of the phone was a jolt of hope and dread. Every update from police was measured and cautious. They knew the odds of finding someone alive after this kind of disappearance grew worse with each passing hour. Meanwhile, detectives began to build a fuller picture of Harold Hallman. They learned he had been involved in another missing person case years earlier. There were whispers of connections to violent incidents overseas. The more they uncovered, the more convinced they became that Erica's disappearance was not random and not a misunderstanding. It was the work of someone with a history of predation. But finding proof was another matter entirely. They needed something concrete. Surveillance footage placed Hallman and Erica together, but it didn't capture what happened afterward. Witnesses had seen Hallman's car near wooded areas in Butler Township. None of it was enough on its own to make an arrest. Then came an unexpected turn. Not long after Erica disappeared, Hallman was hospitalized for self-inflicted injuries. It was during this time that his guard began to slip. Confronted by investigators, he didn't deny knowing Erica. He admitted they had met, but he also began to hint at something darker. He told police he had killed her, and, in chilling detail, he described where they could find her body. For law enforcement, this was both a breakthrough and a heartbreak. The confession meant Erica was no longer missing. She was gone, but it also meant they could bring her home and begin the process of building a case that might finally stop Hallman from hurting anyone else. On December 28, 2020, in a cold, wooded area off Hobby Road in Butler Township, police found the remains of Erica Jean Schultz. The location was remote, quiet, and cut off from the world. Exactly the kind of place someone might choose if they didn't want a body to be found. But Hallman's own words had led them there. The scene was devastating. The brutality of the attack, as later described in court documents, was staggering. Hallman had beaten Erica with a hammer and stabbed her repeatedly. The violence was overkill, a sign perhaps of deep rage or of a man who had no fear of consequences. With Erica's body recovered, the case shifted from a missing person investigation to a homicide. Detectives collected every shred of forensic evidence from the scene, knowing they would need an airtight case in court. But they also knew something else. Hallman's history suggested Erica might not have been his only victim. What investigators didn't know yet was just how far back that history went, or how many lives Harold David Hallman III had already destroyed. That truth would only emerge in the months to come. For Emily and her family, the confirmation of Erica's death was both the end of a desperate search and the beginning of a new kind of pain. The questions multiplied. Why Erica? Why so much violence? Could this have been prevented if someone had acted sooner on warning signs from Hallman's past? Those answers, too, would come slowly, and some would never be fully satisfying. In the days after Erica's body was found, the community of Bloomsburg mourned her loss. Friends gathered to share stories, remembering her warmth and kindness. Her family began to plan a funeral they never should have had to imagine. The holidays that year passed in a haze of grief. But as investigators dug deeper into Hallman's background, they began to uncover a pattern, one that would connect Erica's case to other unsolved crimes, and reveal a man who seemed to kill not out of impulse, but out of a twisted compulsion. This case was far from over. The recovery of Erica Jean Schultz's body in late December 20 closed one chapter of the investigation, but for law enforcement, it also opened another. The confession Harold David Hallman III had given while hospitalized wasn't just a spontaneous outburst. It was a crack in the wall he had built around his violent past. Detectives knew they needed to push harder. In the days that followed, investigators worked to corroborate every detail Hallman had provided. The location of Erica's remains matched his description almost exactly. Forensic teams scoured the wooded area, collecting soil samples, searching for blood-stained tools, and photographing tire impressions. While the hammer Hallman claimed to have used was never recovered at the scene, the wounds on Erica's body matched the blunt force trauma he had admitted to inflicting. The stab wounds were numerous and frenzied, suggesting a killing fueled by something far darker than an argument gone too far. But why Erica? That was the question that haunted detectives and her family. Erica wasn't involved in risky behavior, she wasn't in a volatile relationship, and she wasn't known to spend time with dangerous people. The answer lay in the way Hallman operated. He had met Erica through a dating app, presenting himself as Dave, a friendly, approachable man looking for companionship. For someone like Erica, kind, trusting, and open to making new connections, the approach worked. Once investigators started digging into Hallman's background, his true nature became painfully clear. He was transient, moving between Pennsylvania, Michigan, and even spending time overseas. In '99, while living in Germany, he had been implicated in the murder of a woman named Anjanette Ehlers. Court records revealed that Hallman had confessed to that killing as well, though the full details remained buried in foreign legal files. The pattern was emerging. Hallman targeted women who were vulnerable in some way, drew them into a private setting, and then unleashed extreme violence. The next bombshell came when police connected him to another Pennsylvania case, the 2018 disappearance of Tiana Phillips. Like Erica, Tiana had simply vanished, leaving her loved ones in anguish. Using GPS data, phone records, and witness statements, detectives placed Hallman in the same isolated area where Tiana's remains would later be found. The similarities between the two murders were impossible to ignore. By early 2021, prosecutors were preparing a case that would charge Hallman with 2 counts of criminal homicide, one for Erica and one for Tiana, along with charges of kidnapping and abuse of a corpse. The evidence was overwhelming. Cell tower pings, text messages, and Hallman's own words to police painted a clear picture. In both cases, he had lured the women away from familiar places, driven them to secluded areas, and killed them with excessive brutality. For Erica's family, the weeks leading up to the trial were agonizing. They attended hearings where Hallman appeared, often without visible emotion. They heard the graphic details of what he had done, details that no family should ever have to carry. Emily, Erica's sister, became a vocal presence in the courtroom, a steady, determined force who refused to let her sister's name be lost among the paperwork and legal arguments. Then, in September 21, came an unexpected development. Rather than taking the case to trial, Hallman agreed to plead guilty to both murders. The plea spared Erica's family and Tiana's from the trauma of a lengthy trial and the possibility of hearing him testify. In exchange for his guilty pleas, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty. The sentence, 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. For some, it was a relief to know he would never walk free. For others, there was a lingering frustration. Life in prison meant he had escaped the ultimate punishment. But one thing was certain: Harold David Hallman III would never again have the chance to harm another woman. In court, the families were given the opportunity to speak. Emily stood, her voice steady despite the weight of her grief. She spoke of the sister she had loved, the woman who had been more than just a victim, someone with dreams, quirks, and a deep well of kindness. She spoke of the void Erica's death had left, a wound that time would never fully heal. The judge listened, acknowledging the devastation Hallman had caused, and then, with the strike of a gavel, the legal process came to an end. But for Erica's family, there was no true closure, only the knowledge that justice, in the legal sense, had been served. In the months after the sentencing, Emily began speaking publicly about her sister's story. She wanted people to understand the dangers of online interactions with strangers, especially for vulnerable individuals. She worked with victim advocacy groups, sharing Erica's experience in the hope that it might prevent another family from experiencing the same nightmare. The community of Bloomsburg rallied around the family, holding vigils and memorial events in Erica's honor. Friends and neighbors shared stories of her generosity, how she had cared for injured animals, how she had quietly donated to local causes, how she had been the kind of friend who remembered the little things. Her life, they insisted, would not be defined solely by the way it ended. For investigators, the case left lingering questions. Was Hallman responsible for other unsolved murders? His transient lifestyle and history of violence suggested the possibility. Some detectives quietly believed there were more victims out too. Here, women whose names might never be known. But without concrete evidence, those cases remained shadows. Hallman himself seemed content to remain silent on the matter. Once in prison, he offered no further confessions, no insights into his motives. In interviews, he came across as detached, even when confronted with the human cost of his actions. It was as if, for him, the women he had killed were simply erased once the act was done. For the Schultz family, life was now divided into before and after. Before December 20, there had been normal days, work shifts, holiday plans, small sisterly arguments, and the comfort of knowing Erica was just a call away. After, there was a constant undercurrent of grief, a daily reckoning with the fact that someone so full of life could be taken in such a brutal way. Yet through their loss, they found ways to honor Erica's memory. They established scholarships in her name, donated to animal welfare causes she had cared about, and kept her story alive in local media. Each year, on the anniversary of her death, they gathered to remember her, not as a victim, but as a daughter, sister, and friend. The case of Erica Jean Schultz is a reminder of how quickly darkness can intrude into ordinary life. It's a warning about the hidden dangers of seemingly harmless interactions. But it's also a testament to the power of persistence, the determination of a sister who refused to stop searching. the dedication of investigators who followed the trail until it ended in a courtroom, and the resilience of a community that refused to let a murderer define the life of one of their own. In the end, justice came in the form of 2 life sentences, and the name Harold David Hallman III will be forever tied to the cruelty he inflicted. But for those who loved Erica, the truest form of justice is in the telling and retelling of her story, ensuring that our life, her kindness, and her memory endure far longer than the shadow of the man who took her away.